Hello everyone, I am Jack, and I'm back. You can call me Jack of all trades, and whether I'm a master of how many is kind of up to you. Alright, so some people have requested that I do a more thorough start to finish video on how to do some of the stuff I am doing. So that's what this is. So first off, you'll see we've got the part in the back. We've got it pretty much where we want it, but it's got an uneven surface because we removed the bumper, we put tape over where the bumper would have been, and then we put carbon fiber and epoxy over that. Well, the tape wasn't absolutely flat. We knew it wouldn't be. So the basic shape of the body's good, but that one area is wavy where the tape is. Not a lot, but enough that obviously it would not look good painted and finished. So we need to fill it in. Well, I don't want to use normal body filler because one, it's heavy, and two, it's polyester and not sure how well it's going to stick to epoxy. The general rule is you can put epoxy on polyester, but polyester will not stick well to epoxy. So rather than risk it, we're going to go ahead and use epoxy. Now in some of the areas, we've just used the liquid epoxy, and it works. A little hard to sand, but it does fill the area. The problem is that the surface you're doing has to be level because the epoxy itself is rather runny. Here is the hardener, and you can see it's pretty much a little bit thicker than water, but not a lot. So it required the surface to be flat. Because this is a big piece, we were having to put the part up and get on ladders and all of that. It ended up being a big hassle. So another alternative is to add fillers to the epoxy to make it thicker. There are several different fillers you can use. Let me go through them. One of them is baby powder. Baby powder can be talc. Talc is what they use in Bondo. So that should be safe to use talc in Bondo. It kind of absorbs the liquid and makes it thicker quicker. Now, where can you get talc? Well, baby powder, some of it is made of talc. This is a generic baby powder, but it says it's the same ingredients as Johnson's, and this one happens to be pure cornstarch. So it's hypoallergenic. I guess that's why it's not talc. So be careful with using this. I'm not going to recommend it. I'm just going to say, I didn't realize when I picked it up that it was hypoallergenic. All right, that's one option. Another one is baking soda. Same thing. I don't know where it's used, but it will thicken this. Again, be a little bit careful, but it thickens stuff when you're cooking it, so it's an option. The more conventional options are things like this. This one is called fumed silica. Brand name is Cavasil, and what it is silica sand. So it is sand that has been, I don't know, somehow made into a powder. All right, be careful with these additives or fillers. They're powder and they're lightweight and they go in the air. You should be wearing protection. I've already mixed this. I wasn't even going to open it, but I decided I would just to show you what it looks like. And it is literally, very light powder. So the advantage of this as compared to, say, the talc or any of the others is lightweight. This will actually lighten the weight of your part. All right, the problem with the fumed silica that we've used in the past is it's kind of hard to sand. In fact, it's pretty hard to sand. So when we filled it with the low spots with just plain epoxy, you're sanding epoxy, which is somewhat difficult. This is actually more difficult to sand than plain epoxy. All right, so just be aware of that. Another option is microspheres. These happen to be glass, white glass microspheres, and they're just little balls of glass. They look a whole lot like that. You can see. A little more powdery, not quite as light. This thing it's not heavy. This is relatively heavy. This is lightweight, but this is super lightweight. This thing weighs nothing. All right, the third option, and the one I'm using here, you have to excuse me, it's hot in here. It is actually 10 o'clock, but it's still hot in the shop. And I don't want to turn on the air conditioner because I'm leaving as soon as I do this. So no point in cooling down this entire shop just for, let's say, a half an hour worth of work. So I do have my sweat towel right here. Okay, so the third option or fourth option or whichever option this is the same thing. It is microspheres, but it's not glass, it's phenolic, it's plastic. So it's in here. I have quite a huge box of it because I decided I was going to use it. Needless to say, because it's plastic, it sands a whole lot easier than any of these other options. So I highly recommend you get this. It looks just like those two. It is a lightweight white powder. And the only difference is it sands really easily. Okay, so what I did was I went ahead and didn't mix. I measured out the resin, the epoxy resin, all right? And so I put in a half a cup, all right? So here's a half a cup, and then I added 2 cups of the microspheres. I snuck up on it, adding a little bit of time, thinking it would be okay, and it ended up, it took twice as much of the microspheres to get it to the consistency I wanted. Well, what consistency do I want? Peanut butter-like consistency. I'm going to put it on a vertical surface, and I don't want it running down or sagging. So let me see, this is a half a cup of epoxy resin, and it took a full cup of the microspheres to get it to this thickness. So just want to warn you ahead of time because you think, oh, I can't take very much, and you keep adding and adding and adding. Don't even bother. Just go ahead and mix it 2 to 1. All right. The resin, the hardener, okay? So here's the epoxy. This particular brand of epoxy is a 2 to 1. So it's 2 parts resin to 1 part hardener. So I put a half a cup of resin in here. I put in a full cup of the micro balloons, and then I'm putting in a 1/4 of a cup of the resin. I'm sorry, the hardener. Okay. After you add the hardener, you're supposed to mix it for a minimum of a minute. All right, and I follow that religiously. I also use spatulas here to make sure I scrape everything off the edges, and so I don't have any areas that don't get mixed. Obviously, it's a little bit harder to mix when it's this peanut butter consistency than when it's the normal consistency. So I don't want to bore you with adding all of this and stirring it. It took a while to get that powder in there. And like I said, I had to wear a mask and all of that. And I should be wearing gloves for this. I'm going to start because I am starting to get minor reaction to the epoxy. I think it's mostly because I wear a watch, and I really shouldn't because it gets in between my watch band and my wrist. And I'm just starting to see some red spots that I've not seen in the past. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and add the hardener. Now, believe it or not, I had all these spatulas cleaned, but I set it down over here. I was cleaning the desk, and it got something on here. You don't want to get any foreign material in this because this stuff is really particular about how it gets mixed. If it gets messed up, you will regret it severely. So let me go wipe this off real quick. I keep a lot of paper towels. I go through a lot of them. They're relatively inexpensive compared to all the other options. So I don't know what this is. It probably is that same material, but it's not worth taking a risk. All right, that's got that. You can clean stuff up with alcohol. This is rubbing alcohol. This happens to be 91%. You can get away with the 70%, but the 91% is supposed to be better for working with these materials. Okay, that's clean enough. And then of course I don't want to add alcohol to that mix, so I will wipe this off. So the epoxy I'm using here is System 3 silver tip epoxy. They have different ones. This one I just guessed when I did it, didn't know what I was doing, ordered it. Everything's worked out. It is thinner than I would like, but I am not about to start messing around with other things. That said, I did get some West system and I'm going to try it, but right now, and I've got some other stuff that I'll show you later. One is like a putty that you can use. It's epoxy gel coat, and it's already about this thickness to start off with. And then they actually have some putty stuff that I have that I bought. I was talking to the guy at the place where I'm getting it, Reynolds Advanced Materials. It happens to be local here. And he had like 5 different options and couldn't highly recommend any of them because they don't do body work like this. They do cosplay, masks and swords and all of that kind of stuff. So he just said they would all work pretty much alike. It was up to me which one to use. So that's what I'm doing. Okay, so since I added a 1/4 cup of hardener, you can see that it's not as thick as it was. If I'd known that, I probably would have added yet another 1/4 cup of the microspheres, because this is a little thinner. This is going to sag on me. All right, don't do this. As in, don't do this and not use safety PPE, but I'm going to do it all while it's in a huge plastic bag. All right, and I'm going to keep my distance as much as I can, but literally I can see the, looks like smoke coming off. Okay, that's how lightweight this powder is. Okay, and then again, I try to not breathe this stuff, but it is so lightweight that I don't recommend doing this without safety equipment. All right. The advantage of epoxy over if you use fiberglass resin cures very quickly. This does not, so I get a little bit of latitude in this. Now another way to get the epoxy thicker is of course to let it cure, but it takes a while. It takes probably 30 minutes if you want to use that approach. So you would have to mix up your epoxy, your hardener, and let it sit for at least 30 minutes, and it will start to get hard and stiffer. Now the problem with that is, once it starts doing that, it's pretty quick from it going from that to actually being too cured to spread like you want it to. So I would rather go ahead and mix this like this. This way I don't have to hurry. All right, so I'm going to say that this has been a minute total, and you can see this is nice and smooth. And now it's still not as thick as it was, but I'm going to stop there. And again, I can let it sit for a little while and harden, which means I don't have to rush. One of the other things I got is tint. This is black. It is specifically made. It's UV resistant colored pigment, but unfortunately epoxy itself is not UV resistant. So I don't know what happens when you add a UV resistant to something that's going to yellow naturally in the sun. We will find out. Okay, from previous stuff I found out it takes about 30 drops of this. Believe it or not, a drop is a measurement, and I could go out and figure out exactly that, but I'm not going to. So I literally have to sit here and count 30 drops. And this stuff is way more concentrated than you think. All right, because you would think 30 drops of that into this is only going to make it like a light gray. Well, it didn't earlier. But this is a little more volume than I used last time, and sure enough, it's a light gray. So I'll have to put more in it because I don't want a light gray. I want a black. I really want a matte black. Not sure how I can get it matte, but I definitely don't want a gray. All right, so that's my 30 drops, and you can see that it is a gray. I wouldn't say it's light gray, but it's definitely not black. All right, so we'll try another 10 drops. There's 10 drops. Alright, unfortunately it's still not quite as black as I'd want. It is darker, so I'll do another 10 drops. Oops, 11 drops. Oh well. Okay, so as I'm holding this container, I can feel it start to get warm, which means that the epoxy is starting to cure. It's not hot or anything, but it's definitely warmer than it was. Okay, it's still not as black as I want, but there is a limit to how much additives you can add. Now the advantage of the powders is they're pretty much inert, so you don't have to worry about that, but the tint is not inert, it's a liquid, so I would worry about how much I would put in there. Ideally, I'm thinking something like 1% mix, but I don't remember how much this is, so I'm going to do another 10 drops. There we go. So luckily I'm videoing this so I can go back and figure out exactly how much I've added, and I will figure out what the percentage is. Hopefully I haven't gone over the 1%. I don't think I have. Okay, it's still not pitch black, but it's a pretty dark, let's call it dark gray. And again, I'm afraid of putting too much in it, so I am not going to add any more. Okay. See, that's not going to stay on a vertical surface. All right, I didn't want to do this, but I'm going to add yet another. However, I am not going to color this one, but I am going to put it in here. And normally I have a piece of wood that I scrape across the top of this to make sure it's measured accurately. Okay. And I can feel it getting even warmer. And if you remember from before, the change, like I said, I should be wearing PPE. This will change it from that viscosity to literally stiff peanut butter. But if you watch, you can see the powder dispersing. I'm trying to disturb it as little as possible. I'm folding it in as I do this. And sure enough, there we go. said, should have been wearing my mask, but it's not here. All right, so now we're at peanut butter consistency. Still not quite as thick as it was before, but you've got to draw the line somewhere. And again, as it cures, of course, it's going to get thicker. So I'm going to go ahead and not rush to put this down. And of course now the volume's a whole lot more. I probably could have done a quarter of a cup of the resin and an eighth of a cup, which I think is 2 tablespoons of the hardener, and had plenty to do what I'm going to do. So this may be way more than I need for what I'm doing back there, but it's already mixed up. You can't unmix it. I want to make sure I get all the powder out of here so I don't end up with blotches of powder. All right. I use 2 of these so that I can scrape everything out when I'm done. So there's that. I already have the spreaders, Mondo spreaders in the back. And let me take a drink right here before I start working. And normally I have the fan going, which makes it tolerable, but the noise, I didn't want you to have to listen to me talk over the fan. All right, we're going to move back to the shop. So let me move the camera first. All right. So here's the part. Now what we did was we made this as carbon fiber. We did 2 layers of carbon fiber. It seemed okay, but as we were putting the filler in here, oh, I gotta back this up a little bit. All right, as we were putting the filler on here, we saw this flexing a lot, so we decided to add another layer of carbon fiber. So now it has 3 layers of carbon fiber. We just did that today, so it is not completely cured. It's somewhat solid, but it's not completely solid. But it's solid enough for what I'm going to do, which is I'm going to add this epoxy as body filler. All right, I'll be back in a second. All right, so let me switch through here. Now this is getting warmer than it was, which I expected. In the very near future, we're going to clean the shop. We just have so many projects going on. Let me make sure this is still working. Normally I have it reversed, but there we go. Yep, still working. Okay. All right. Normally I have it reversed and I can watch it from here, but for some reason I decided not to do that this time. Okay, so now I've got this mixed up. It is, like I said, peanut butter-like consistency, a little bit thinner than I'd like, but we'll fix that. Actually, time will fix that for us. And I found that out with the other one. It started out light, and then the more I worked it, the thicker it got, which is why I have these, see these ripples right here? Initially they weren't there, and I kept thinking, oh, I'll just get it smoother and smoother, and I should have stopped because it was pretty smooth, and I actually made it rougher because I didn't stop. All right, so now I just need to get this stuff on here. So I'm going to start out literally just getting it on here. Okay, once I get it on there, then I use your typical body working tools to spread it around. So when you do this, you want to get it thin because this stuff cures, the speed of cure is based on how thick the layer is. So the sooner you get it thinner, the more working time you have before it starts hardening. Okay? And honestly, it is starting to harden already. So my goal now is to get this stuff on here and out of this container as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it will harden to where I cannot spread it anymore, and it will be pretty close to worthless. The other thing is, because I put so much of the material in there, when you first put it on, it looks grainy, but if you watch, after I put it on, a lot of the graininess went away. It smooths out on its own somewhat. And one thing you want to do is make sure you fill in the voids. As I spread it, sometimes there will be an area that does not fill in. You want to go in and fill that in as quickly as possible. Because as this cures, it gets harder and harder to get it to fill in areas like that. Which again is why this little spatula helps, because I can really direct this material where I want it. All right. Okay. All right, there's still stuff in here, but actually I have places where I can use it. And I'll find out after I spread it. I go, oh, I always find out, I wish I had just a little bit more spread into one area or another. All right. All right, I've got that. Now I'm going to go in here and spread everything again as good as I can, as quickly as I can. So what happens when it starts curing is there will be little chunks. Don't know why it does that, but there will be chunks that cure faster than everything else. So as you're doing this, you'll be dragging along there, it'll look really smooth, and all of a sudden you'll see this little trail where something's being dragged across it. And what it is, it's some of this that has cured ahead of time. So the best thing is to dig those out, which is a pain to do, but if you don't do it, you'll have a spot that you would know you will have to go back and repair later. So it depends on if you're trying to get it all, whoops, fell swoop, which I could never do, so I've accepted the fact that I am not that good of a body man to be able to get all of this absolutely finished smooth in one shot. So this is where I'm talking about. Right there is a spot. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but every time I go across here, it does not want to fill in. So I have to go in there and specifically fill it in. And again, there's that piece that I'm talking about. So I'm going to work it out to the outside edge. And I always try to go in multiple directions when I'm spreading this. So as you saw, up until now I've been going back and forth. Now I'm going down trying to make sure I don't end up with streak marks. And one of the things I've discovered is that I did not mix too much of this because I was thinking I could fill in this whole area and then have a lot left over, and it's not even going to completely fill in the area. So my goal here is to get the area that I do cover as smooth and nice looking as I can, and then I'll go back in and fix the areas that I couldn't cover. And again, I'm getting some of those spots that I don't like, the voids. They will have to be filled in. Small defects, we've been fixing with CA glue. And each defect we look at it and decide, hey, how do we want to fix that? What do we think is the best way to fix that one defect? Is it small enough that we can do it with CA glue? Or is it going to require epoxy? Or are we actually going to have to put carbon fiber in with the epoxy as well? Which reminds me, that's one of the things you can do. You can put a carbon fiber. We've been using carbon fiber to do the chopped carbon fiber look, and so you can use that if you want. You can also cheat and use fiberglass. They have chopped fiberglass that is like, you know, you can get as small as 1/8-inch pieces, and it's literally 1/8-inch pieces of fiberglass. It works well as a filler. And it also adds some strength as compared to something like these microfiber things. The microfiber things don't really add any strength because they're not connected to each other. If you use epoxy or carbon fiber, then you have that fiber that you've added to tie things together and actually make it stronger. Okay, this license plate area has been difficult to do, so I wanted to go ahead and get, this is just a rough covering over it. It'll take another application, I already know. Okay, so there are people that are really good at spreading body filler. I'm not. And in fact, the guy that taught me, he could sit here and do something like this, and when he was done, it looked like it was ready to be painted. Me, you can see the streak lines from where I went across it. So I do not have that talent yet. And it's been years and years that I tried, so I'm not sure I would hold my breath waiting for me to develop that talent. I can get it pretty good, but it's not to the level that he could. All right, so maybe I shouldn't have added that last bit of microspheres because this is stiffer than I would want it to be. It's working. It's just I'm not going to get, I think if it was a little smoother, not quite so stiff, I would get a better finish than what I'm doing. I am pressing relatively hard, and it is picking up some of the materials I go across. But I think I would have rather have had some minor sagging than to fight with this like I'm having to do now. I was wanting to get all this area in between the taillights, but it's already getting stiff enough that I don't think, it's time consuming to do the tedious work. So I don't think I'll have enough time. All right, I probably should not do what I'm going to do, but those that know me know I experiment all the time. I used this earlier, but again, it wasn't quite as stiff. This is a squeegee. The advantage of this is there's going to be less number of but you can see right there, see the spots that didn't fill in? And it ends up here. So it ends up taking off a lot of material. I don't think that's what I want to do. So I'm going to go put it right back. And you can see right now it is getting stiff. Okay. And the edge wasn't real clear. I had one of these that I had it nice and smooth, and I don't know what happened to it. And this one's a little rough. And you can see now, as it stiffens up, it's getting harder and harder to spread it without having those voids. And there's more and more of these solid pieces showing up. All right, that takes care of that. Let's clean it back off. We'll go over this area. I'm not going to use a squeegee because it didn't really seem to help. So again, I'm learning as I go. So I learned maybe next time make it a little thicker, a little thinner than I think is the correct thickness for spreading, because it does self-level. And I always try to leave some area where I can clean off the squeegee. That way I'm not wasting any of this. Oops. Now, if you remember from when I first showed you this, I said, oh, when I did this last time, I wish I would have stopped a little earlier because the streaks were there. Well, I am now at that streak stage in this one where it's kind of a choice. Do I keep messing with it or do I leave it alone? And the answer is, I don't know. Okay, so part of me said, you know what, I'm going to go up and down. Because by going up and down, I'm going to have fewer streaks. But then I just realized, wait a minute, it self-levels, and it's not going to self-level up and down. It will self-level if the streaks are horizontal. And again, this gets to where I probably am going past the point I should be doing this. Oh, and the other thing is you don't want to stop, because if you stop, chances are you will leave a mark where you stop. Okay, so now I'm going to lightly go over the areas where I see the streak mark. But you can see that there's a streak mark right there. I don't think it's going to go away. The good thing is now that we've reinforced it from the backside, it's not flexing nearly as much. I won't say it's not flexing at all, but it's not flexing nearly as much as it was before. If I had an assistant here, I would have them dig out these little spots, and I would go over it after they dig them out. But I don't. So I'm going to do as good as I can and accept the fact that we're going to have to repair those small areas where those artifacts are. Okay. I do have a little bit more of the filler here, and like I said, I try to leave some excess in case there's some spot that I just couldn't fix that way. But in this case, it all looks pretty good. So I am filling in this license plate area. Like I said, it's a bit of a pain. So what happened is, actually this came out of a mold and it would have been great, except for the fact that we did it in stages. And every place there was an overlap, and we did it over 3 days. We shouldn't have done that. And so every place there was an overlap, unfortunately there were air pockets because the work from the day before had already solidified and we could not get it to blend in nicely. So we're forced to redo this and fill in those air pockets. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be doing this, because the areas that did not overlap came out looking pretty nice. All right, right now I'm just trying to scrape this bowl clean, and then I'll use the squeegee to smooth it out. And this is just so I don't end up wasting any. It's surprising how much of this sticks to the sides of the container. Kind of like peanut butter. When you're down to the bottom of the jar, you're trying to get the last of the peanut butter out of the jar. Well, that's where I'm at now. All right, so I got that out of there. Now I put it onto the squeegee. The advantage is it also cleans off the spatula. You've got to clean this stuff off. These particular spatulas, we found out the hard way that this stuff actually eats at the spatula if you leave it on too long. Whereas if you don't leave it on too long, it comes off relatively easily. All right. The other thing is always make sure I have something to set tools down on. In this case, I've got the container, and then I've got the smaller squeegee that I had no intention of using. So that way, when I set stuff down, I set it down on it. All right, so now I get to spread out that last stuff I just put down. And again, I don't expect it to spread out real well, but it gives me something to sand. And so I know this whole area is not going to come out nice, but what I'm trying to do is get the areas that I do cover nice. So in other words, it won't cover this whole license plate area, but this part over here, I can get, let's say, half of it nice and even. And that way next time, I won't even have to touch this area. And the good thing is, this area doesn't have to be perfect because there's going to be a license plate over it. And those of you that have worked with this material before know that the thinner it is, the slower it cures, the thicker it is, the faster it cures. So even though these areas were getting cured enough that I couldn't really do anything with it, because this is so thin, it was only the stuff that was on the tools that I can still work with it right now. Whereas that stuff that was in the container is, you saw it was creating artifacts that I was having to fight with. All right. Now this is one of those cases that I wish I was a better body man, because then I could probably get this real thin and smooth and real pretty looking, but I'm not. All right, I think I've pretty much gotten as much of everything out of here as I can. Got it as smooth as I can. So I'm looking at this saying, oh, I see ripples in there. And part of me is tempted to go in there and try to get rid of those ripples. I know from experience that I will probably make it worse. So I'm going to just leave it the way it is. All right. So I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is a definite artifact right there. The two options are to try to dig it out, but then I will have evidence that I dug it out. I don't want that, so I'm just going to leave it. Oh, there's a bug in it. It always happens that when you do this, somehow these bugs decide. I have no clue where that bug even came from. All right, well, since I dug the bug out, let me see if I can smooth out that area. All right, well, I'm going to dig out this artifact too. So I'm going to put it right there, and sure enough, it's like a little piece of now, if you're lucky and that artifact is near an edge, you can just keep working it out to that closest edge. But you can see that because I decided to do this, I'm now having to rework this whole area to try to smooth it out. Like I said, I tend to end up overworking areas and causing problems. Okay, so now you can see there is a definite ridge at the edge of this. So again, my choice is, well, do I leave it or do I try to fix it? And of course, I'm going to try to fix it, which actually looks like it's leaving a bunch of smaller ridges instead of the one big one every so often. So what I'm doing this time is I'm putting more pressure on my little finger here than here. So this thing has a very slight angle, so you can see that it minimized that groove that was there. It's still there, but it's not as pronounced as it was. And then I'm taking the excess stuff and kind of just swiping it on here. All right. Again, I'm tempted to go in here and try to fix these little ripples, but we've already seen that that's probably not a good idea. If I was a better body man, it would probably be a good idea. All right. So there we go. Start to finish. That's how I mix up some epoxy, some micro balloons, thicken it, add some color to it, wait for it to get to a reasonable thickness, and then spread it on there as smoothly as I can. So tomorrow, this should be hard enough in the morning to go ahead and sand it. Might have to wait longer than that, let's say till the end of the day tomorrow, because sometimes I rush things. So as I look at this, I still see a couple ripples. I don't know if you can see them, but like there and there. This side actually looks pretty good. There was some low spots here. They still might be there, but if they are, they're less than they were. At some point, ideally, it'll get to where I won't be covering the whole surface. I'll use guide coat, there we go. I'll use guide coat on here and find only the low spots, and then I will fix only the low spots. But right now, I'm trying to get the whole surface relatively smooth and even. That's bugging me already, seeing that. Part of me really wants to go try to get rid of those ripples. I'm on the fence whether or not I will be able to do that or not. Tell you what, I'm going to leave it. Not like me to do that. Normally I would just attack it, but I'm going to leave it and see how well it sands out. All right. So as usual, like, subscribe, hit the alert, hit the thanks if you want to donate. And if you don't like what I'm doing, you don't know Jack. Bye.